are on the third step of our journey through Spain, and this was actually a bit of a departure from Andalusia. We'd be looping back there before the end of our trip, but this next leg took us right to the heart of Spain, to the Extremadura region, which, let's be honest, sounds like a European brand of AA batteries. In particular, the town of Merida. Nowadays, not an especially large town, but extraordinarily significant in antiquity. This was August Emirata, and as you'll see, it is absolutely overflowing with Roman ruins. So, we hopped on a bus from Seville. It was about 3 hours to get there. You could watch the landscape change as we got further north, but in a way that was hard to put your finger on. It wasn't all flat by any means, but a mosaic of hills and fields, all in a parched brown with patches of greenery against the blue skies. At times it became quite liminal. Merida doesn't really give away its secrets to begin with. I mean, the outskirts of the town definitely don't hint at anything special, but a short walk from the bus station and your first clue is when you come across this quite incredible bridge. This is around 3/4 of a kilometre long with 62 spans. It is the longest bridge we have surviving from antiquity. Whew. Welcome to Merida. Yeah, I mean, I actually appreciated that in coming from the bus station, we got to enter the town that way because it is a hell of an opening statement. The bridge was actually one of the earliest parts of the city, built by the Romans in around 25 BC, and you probably guessed from the title, yes, it was founded by Augustus. And yeah, like a lot of Roman towns that formed around major river crossings like London, or Vienne in France, or Cordoba, or many others, and it would become the capital of Roman Lusitania, that is the southern and western part of Iberia. Just on the other side is the Alcazaba, which we'll get to in a bit. Truthfully, our story kind of stalled here slightly, as even though passing by incredible things like the Temple of Diana, we both needed to get a bite and also kill a bit of time before we could drop our bags to the Airbnb. So we ended up having a cheap lunch in this rather amusing pastiche of an 80s bar. It was probably the most culturally inverse thing we could have done in a famed Roman town, but it was the middle of the day, overly hot, and barely anywhere was open. So yeah, fine, whatever. Okay, eventually we could get into the cool of the apartment and drop our stuff. I was actually quite chuffed with this one, because Merida and the whole region doesn't have anywhere near the footfall of the more touristy south. It means you can get some remarkably nice rooms for pretty cheap. I found this weird void in the stairwell to be a puzzling architectural choice. Before you say unused lift shaft, no, the building has a lift. So, yeah, I got nothing, but Mum, the void is staring back at me just like Nietzsche said it would. So yes, Merida is essentially one huge open-air Roman museum, and in the 40-odd hours we were there, we visited something like 18 to 19 different Roman sites, depending on how you slice it. But before some of you get too excited, or half of you click away, we are not going to chronicle all of them here. In the future, we are building towards a huge series of Roman sites all around Europe and the Mediterranean, so when that time comes, and goodness knows it's taking a while, I promise we'll go through them all. For now, it was later in the day, some sites had limited opening hours, and wasn't attempting to make too much headway on the huge to-do list I had. If I recall, Jen was having a rest inside, so I was darting around town in and out the streets catching various bits like this, for example, known as the Arch of Trajan. Pretty, wow, yeah. One of the things I'd been especially looking forward to was the Visigothic Museum. Now, this might appear to some people to be the least interesting thing in the city. Actually, I think we need some quick background first. In between the loss of Roman control in Iberia in the 400s and the invasion of the Islamic armies in the early 700s, there are around 3 centuries of Visigothic rule in Iberia. Now, compared to the soaring aqueducts of the Romans and the horseshoe arches and elaborate art of Al-Andalus, the Visigoths used to be viewed as something of an inferior interregnum between these two great powers, but the more you look into their culture, it was incredibly rich with art and sculpture. It's no secret that even by the association of its name, the Goths have been viewed with distaste by modern historians, but that view is changing, and the more we've been able to see of Visigothic Spain, the more intriguing and fascinating it has become. This museum in Merida has many examples of the culture, mostly in these carved stones, but they are by no means lacking in creativity and subtle beauty. So, a few more loose bits, like these various fragments of Roman road, the angled flag shot, wasn't embarking on the big targets yet, was saving them for the full day. We did have a really nice walk down by the river. The autumnal browns emerging in the trees were particularly gorgeous. You know, I can just kind of feel the warm glow just by watching this footage back. Sunset by the noticeably modern bridge to the northwest. So in the evening we went out to eat, and attempting not to go against the grain, this was later than we'd normally eat. Thing is, while in the other parts of Andalusia, a lot of people had a small amount of English, so muddling through was easy. As far as Merida goes, despite the non-too-subtle pull of some of the most remarkable sites surviving from Roman Spain, there was scarcely a word of English. Now, to be clear, I realise the problem here is absolutely not the Spanish not speaking English, rather us English not speaking Spanish. It was just funny that all the places we've been, from Morocco, Croatia, Turkey, and even Jordan, this was probably the hardest we'd ever hit the language barrier. We were also just trying to keep it inexpensive, so we ended up going here, which was fine. Nothing too special, but yeah, whatever. So, dusk and match cut. It's dawn on day 2, got up early. Bridge looking gorgeous and the sun just kissing the top of the monuments. Yeah, this is why we do the early mornings, folks. So, while the sun was still low, we headed across town to here. I mean, yeah, it's alright, I guess. I think in a weird way, I find myself even more enamoured with this because it's ruined, rather than if, like the Segovia aqueduct, it was immaculately intact. I wanted to do a whole discussion on the hydraulic engineering to Roman Emirata, and then I rapidly realised I am way under-researched for that chat, so it's not happening in this episode. But after that, and this is kind of the hilarious thing, as if the ruined aqueduct isn't mysterious and beautiful enough, Merida is just quietly clearing its throat like, yeah, still not done. I've actually got 2 other aqueducts over here as well. I mean, just look at that vanishing point. So, picking up the pace somewhat, we're going to do quick summaries of pretty much everything else for today. By contrast to the bath ruins by the aqueducts, which are somewhat slight, the circus is vast, though sparse. Yeah, it's the perennial Roman circus problem. Where they survive, they tend to do so pretty unimpressively. I mean, even the one in Rome is mainly just the footprint, with a little masonry surviving at its northern side. All that means you can point the camera at it, but it's hard to get a compelling image, I am embarrassed to say. From there, it was the subterranean remains of the Basilica of Santa Eulalia, and then a pretty remarkable survivor, not because of height, but just that a bunch of modern buildings were prevented from covering it. It's the archaeological area of Merida, and it has so much going on. Next to that is the Alcazaba. Now, while primarily a fortress dating to Al-Andalus in the 800s, its previous layers were as a Visigothic wall, which itself was an augmentation to the Roman defences. The structure you see here is contemporary with the rest of the Islamic fortifications and leads down to a cistern, but it reuses old masonry, including some rather attractive Visigothic flourishes. The ramparts also offer great views to the bridge. It was pretty hot by this point in the direct sun, but worth every minute. We then crossed town to see the theatres. Now, the amphitheatre, this sits somewhere in the middle. It's in modest shape. I mean, most of it's still there. I've definitely seen more impressive. I mean, look, it certainly beats anything we've got in the UK, so, take this rating with a pinch of salt. It is, however, upstaged by the theatre next door, which, despite there being a large amount of restoration, it's remarkable the level to which the Cine Fronds, or the elaborate wall behind the stage, survives. This is something of an icon for Merida. Sidebar, this was a rather nice feature in the Airbnb. I thought, that was pretty cool. A lot of Roman theatres have survived, and I mean, we've seen a lot. Here they are, cut into a space so short as to render the individual shots meaningless. But as far as these go, there are far fewer. It's usually either gone entirely or heavily ruined. So the next stop was the museum, and yeah, it definitely felt good to be indoors with the aircon. This place is vast, even the building is impressive. It has this massive collection, as well as the smaller items and the various statues. There's also these mosaics mounted to the walls, even some surviving frescoes. Yeah, it's hard not to be blown away by all of this, including this, one of the surviving fragments from the amphitheatre. Just look at the way the paint has survived. And there's some remains in the basement, and just across the road there's another archaeological park, and yes, I am massively glossing over all of these. Slightly confusingly, another large archaeological park across town, which is visually difficult to pick apart in my footage because I didn't take enough wide shots. This was late in the afternoon and I was having to rush in case of missing its opening times, so that was pretty much time up. Now, I know that's a lot and mainly just a summary, but I was mainly just elated we'd managed to get around all of it in just one day and a bit. In fact, let's have a supercut of all of it just to recap. That was most of our time done. I'll admit, much like elsewhere we've been in Spain, the coffee on offer was not the greatest. Like, not the worst, just... Well, okay, so one example I bothered to film. For lack of much choice, we ended up sitting down in this cafe, which kind of reminded me a lot of the sort of city centre tea rooms you'd get in the UK in the 90s. The sort of pervasive smell of tobacco kind of added to the retro feel. I'm not making a moral judgment or anything, it's just always surprising when you go to places where smoking's still so common. Anyway, yeah, the coffee was okay, but like nothing to write home about. And funny enough, this hurried espresso I had at the Merida bus station was one of the best I had all week. Yeah, I don't want to give the impression I wasn't trying, but I mean, that was the impression that the few cafes here gave. You know, there's no shortage of bars, but scarcely a single place that really had any passion or enthusiasm for coffee. It just happens to be something that's available on the menu as well. Oh, and it didn't occur to me that this was even a thing, but there's not really a minimal alcohol pricing law here, meaning if you go to a local supermarket, you can be picking up beers for like 29 cents. So I permitted myself some casual day drinking through this trip. The town of Merida itself, if you take away all the Roman ruins, it's quite nice. While unavoidably modern, yeah, the houses and shops don't really maintain that old town feel you get in some historic towns. There's definitely some nice flourishes of unique architecture. You know, it's this really difficult thing to put my finger on. When we were walking the streets, it somehow reminded me of Chichester. Now, I realise the Meridians, if that is their collective noun, might not appreciate the comparison. I mean, Chichester has, let's see, part of its Roman wall that has been overhauled several times to the point of not really being Roman masonry anymore, this in situ mosaic fragment, this bathhouse in the museum, and an amphitheatre that is extremely hard to perceive on camera. By contrast, Merida has all of this. What I mean, it's that medium-sized town with oversized significance thing. It's hard to describe fully. I mean, you know, and I'm not trying to put the place down. I don't know, I just have this familiar feeling of what it must be like to grow up as a teenager in this town, I guess. It just felt familiar somehow. Okay, let's wrap this up. Didn't film dinner on day 2 because it was just pizza and it was fine, but who really cares? Did get some nice nighttime shots around Merida, the Temple of Diana looking particularly spectacular when lit up. And one final treat, it was a very early start the next morning to retrace our steps back to the bus stop, and yeah, I think this needs a supercut. So, espresso, and we were on our way. That clock is wrong, by the way. It was a lot earlier than that. Back across the Spanish countryside, which was very relaxing to watch go by. I mean, yeah, we had to really keep up the pace to see everything we'd planned to here in just a day and a bit. I don't think you can do this in just one day and hit everything satisfactorily. 2 days, Yeah, that would probably suffice. I'm guessing most people wouldn't be quite as picky as us, also trying to catch all these small extras scattered around. Now, I'm keeping this short. We've glossed over a lot, but it was back to Seville and then on to our final stop of this 4-part trip. We were revisiting Cordoba, so you can catch that in the next episode. Now that we've got a bit more here, it's nice to have enough for a Spain playlist, so also have a look through the other episodes there. If you've enjoyed the music in the background, it's ours. We make all the music for these episodes, and you can catch it all on bandcamp.com. If you want to support the channel, that's the place to do it. Otherwise, you can catch us on all the socials, and we'll see you again very soon.